The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is even more clever than you think. The ability to tackle the story in any order you want is the result of very clever video game design that slipped right through all of our hands. In this video, I'm going to analyze Breath of the Wild to figure out how it achieved such a technically impressive open world, as well as how I believe it impacts the future of open world games. Now, although Breath of the Wild is famous for having a great open world, the open world genre is not perfect. In fact, the first topic I want to tackle before analyzing Breath of the Wild specifically is the apparent dilemma between open world games and linear story games. For those not aware, the dilemma is that it appears that open world games like Skyrim, Minecraft, and Breath of the Wild necessarily need to sacrifice their main story to achieve fun gameplay. On the other hand, linear story games like Ocarina of Time appear to have less enjoyable gameplay mechanics because such games are too restrictive. Warning. Before continuing, I will not be holding back from spoilers in this video, so proceed with caution. Also, it'd be real nice if you could subscribe to my channel and help it grow. Given my low subscriber count, you'd be a day one supporter in a few years if we actually grow. Anyway, back to the dilemma. The fact that open world games sacrifice story is understandable. If a player can approach a story however he wants, then it's not obvious at all how to make events dependent on each other, and a story, by definition, is a set of dependent events. Take The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess for example. Let's think through what would happen if the game was open world. Imagine you could get the Master Sword as soon as you want, like you can in Breath of the Wild. The issue with doing so in Twilight Princess is that you'd then be able to transform into a wolf on demand immediately after starting the game. This, in turn, means that all of the Twilight sections earlier in the game would become unnecessary and would also likely break. Now, this is only one arbitrary example, but it reveals how easy it is to break dependencies between events when attempting to architect an open world. The order of events in Twilight Princess heavily matters, and that's been the narrative of the game industry thus far. Adventure games, for the most part, have been more like interactive books than like sandboxes. This has especially been the case for The Legend of Zelda, whose producer, Eiji Aonuma, a few years ago stated that completing dungeons in a certain order is a convention of Zelda which has to be reconsidered as part of the mission for Breath of the Wild. So, how exactly did Aonuma and his team make Breath of the Wild both have a story and also be approachable in any order? Well, they gracefully avoided having to order events at all. Let's look one step closer. Nintendo evaded the problem of ordering events by making the bulk of the story of Breath of the Wild occur in the past. Through Link's memories, we relive many of the events that occurred 100 years before Breath of the Wild takes place, such as Zelda's attempts to harness her royal power, or even the interactions between our hero and the other champions. Setting the story in the past and reliving the story through memories enables the best of both worlds. A story that still makes sense, since it's still a linear story, and an open world experience enabled by the fact that memories can be recalled in any order. So to summarize, the formula that the Zelda team discovered is 1. Start out with a linear story. 2. Push it back in time. And 3. Spread memories across the world so players will experience the linear story in arbitrary order, almost like a YouTube playback bar. This, of course, comes with its downsides. For one, you may experience the climax of the story before the build-up, which may be confusing. Though not perfect, shifting the story in time is a very well thought out solution to the problem. So well thought out, in fact, that I'm convinced Aonuma and his team sat together and came to this conclusion the same exact way we just did in hindsight. So that's how the Zelda team solved the problem of making an open world game with a linear story. But on top of that, they also used a few more mechanisms to make the events in the present approachable in any order as well. For example, to make the main objective of the game, destroying Calamity Ganon, non-linear, the Zelda team uses several independent story threads that are loosely tied together at the end. Those independent story threads are of course the liberation of the divine beasts. Each divine beast is in its own isolated part of the world, causing problems to its own isolated race of Hyrule. These threads form their own critical sections, where order within them matters, But at any point, one of those independent story threads can be suspended and revisited again later after yielding time to another thread. This game is starting to sound a lot like a concurrent program in computer science, but I digress. The different threads of the game are then loosely tied together by the fact that doing them helps you weaken the Calamity Ganon, and also by giving you some useful champions powers. Personally, I think the Divine Beasts were too loosely tied together into the story, but the general idea is on point. Now, the independent story threads alone would be a cop-out solution to achieving open world, but what I think has a lot of potential to be capitalized on here is the manner in which earlier events in the game are integrated back into the story to affect later parts of the game. Another mechanism that pervades the entire game are the shrines. The shrines are composed into the orchestra that is Breath of the Wild, similarly to how the Divine Beast story arcs are. You can do them to implicitly help you achieve the main objective. At first, the shrines don't appear necessary to the game. However, doing them is the only way you can get the Master Sword. On top of this, getting the Master Sword also expands the story. Upon obtaining it, the Deku Tree relays to you a message destined to you from Zelda. This message is something that Zelda tells the Deku Tree in a memory that Link doesn't fully remember. Probably because he wasn't there to remember it, but what do I know? Point is, the game's open world feels best when multiple apparently unrelated events are composed to serve future events. This is what makes open world events feel meaningful as opposed to being filler events. Such composition is found even in the music of the video game. For example, there's no single overworld theme like there is in every Zelda game. There is simply a lot of pleasant sound effects that are composed to form something like a dynamically generated theme that works incredibly well. So let's recap what we've learned from open world in Breath of the Wild so far. 1. You can solve the problem of open world by making order not matter. Breath of the Wild does this specifically using a story shifted to the past plus memories. 2. Side quests that appear irrelevant can actually be meaningful if they're either directly or indirectly serving the main objective. When the events aren't sufficiently tied back into the game, the events feel less meaningful. If you think about it, this second point is even how real life works. You have several unrelated linear strong stories like work, school, and family that you're trying to tie together to serve a higher purpose like buying a house or owning your own business. Like in real life, in a video game there must also be a single end goal, even for an open world. This is because only through one single grand goal can you measure whether or not the events are meaningful, as we've been talking about so far. So that wraps up my analysis as to how Breath of the Wild solved open world. The ingenious idea to place a story in the past is proof that it's possible to have a perfectly linear story exist literally across an open world, and that the dilemma between linearity and openness does not actually exist. What this also means is that developers should not naively add open world elements to new games if they want to make them open world. Doing so, without considering how to compose them back into the story, will lead to a lot of filler content into a boring open world. Now I can stop there, but hold your horses, because as a bonus I'd like to discuss two ideas I have about how we can engineer open world stories moving forward, using what we just learned from Breath of the Wild. The first is that I think we should build storylines not as lines, but as directed acyclic graphs. In computer science, a DAG is a data type that captures dependencies between, well, anything. Whether it's the events of a story or even something totally unrelated like a detective trying to link suspects together on her whiteboard. All graphs need nodes and edges. In the case of the detective, nodes would be something like the people whose pictures are on the whiteboard, and edges would be like arrows pointing from one person to another. Now, we're not doing this for no reason. The benefit of modeling a story as a DAG is that there are well-known algorithms for working with DAGs, like finding whether or not there's a cycle. So let's lay out the rules of how we'll build a story using a DAG. We'll draw nodes for the major events of the game, like getting the Master Sword, doing the Divine Beasts, and the memories. We'll draw edges between the nodes to show that one event requires the other. Optional events will be connected through dashed lines. What's great is that now we can more formally define the idea of composition that we've been talking about so far in the video. Take a look at the Divine Beasts. They are not related to each other directly, but eventually they serve the same purpose, and we can see that in the graph because they all point to the same node. That's the composition we've been talking about so far that makes events feel meaningful. What I think is the most interesting in this DAG is what happens with the memories, the Master Sword, and the shrines. It's a more complex looking part of the graph, and that checks out with what in my opinion at least was the best part of the game, the events surrounding the Master Sword. On top of that, we can define how meaningful an event is based simply on how many hops away it is from the end goal, and on how many events it depends on. This means we can also define filler events as events that have no path to the end goal at all, and there are multiple search algorithms we can use on DAGs to do that. Linear games are captured by this model as well. Their problem though is that they are not sparse enough, as they are of course linear. Altogether, capturing the story as a DAG seems to be useful because we can intuitively understand which parts of the story would be interesting based on even how complex they look in the graph visually. This DAG model also furthers my point that the dilemma between openness and linearity does not actually exist. It's just a matter of making your graph less linear, which when viewed through the lens of this model, seems pretty easy to do actually. Alright, I know you guys are getting tired of me at this point, but my second idea for solving open world is to somehow capture the concept of motivation into a game engine. This motivation would be to our game engine what energy is to a physics engine, the urge to act or to progress. Now imagine Breath of the Wild worked something like this. Every NPC in the game has motivation to defeat the Calamity Ganon or to solve their local problems. You could foster motivation in others by helping them with their problems, and maybe once a few NPCs are motivated enough, they form a small army to fight the Calamity with you and storm the castle with you. Maybe if you disappoint enough people, you actually strengthen the opposing Yiga clan and therefore Ganon's forces. And if you've seen the latest Tears of the Kingdom trailer, this may actually be something that'll happen. These would be things that you control in your game engine, however that's done. Would that be difficult? Yes, but it doesn't have to be perfect at the start. Anyway, now I'm getting too deep into theory. So let's backtrack to the main point I was trying to get across. The dilemma between linearity and openness of a video game can indeed be solved without having to sacrifice one for the other, and Breath of the Wild, though not perfect, has shown us the way forward in solving this problem. I'm gonna wrap up here, but don't forget to subscribe for more and thank you for watching. This was a really fun video to make and I hope to make more videos like this one soon.